Our next speaker, Kathleen Marden, has engaged in UFO abduction research and investigation for more than 22 years. She specializes in the psychology of abduction and UFO abduction history and the psychology of debunking, and is developing protocols to identify little-known commonalities among those who have experienced alien abduction, with the goal of differentiating between psychological and real experiences. Recently, Kathy was appointed by MUFON to be the Director of Abduction Studies. Please allow me to welcome to the stage Kathleen Marden.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's really nice to be with you again this year. And let's begin. He pushed on my abdomen with something flat. It was diamond-shaped. He pushed over my ovaries and it burned. He said, "That will be all." I asked the purpose, and he says, "It is not for you to know. You are part of the whole." I felt some fear. He makes me know that he has seen me for a long time. Anonymous. NASA estimates that there are 50 billion plus planets in our Milky Way galaxy, and 500 million plus are in the Goldilocks zone, meaning that some of them probably have Earth-like conditions and might possibly support life. Most of us in this audience today have done enough research on the topic of alien visitation to know that we are most likely being visited right now. We have photographic evidence. Here's the Belgium Triangle. And two photographs taken, one in McMinnville, Oregon in 1950, and the other in France in 1957. Identical photos, it seems, of a craft that is not of this earth. So, friend or foe, what is their assessment of our behavior? Because I sort of have an intuition that they might treat us in a manner in which we might treat each other, or lower forms of life on this planet. I think when they came down initially, they assessed our technological development. They wanted to know if we were friend or foe. They wanted to know what our technological capability would be. And they could possibly, in 1949, see the Viking rocket, which was used as a weapon, developed as a weapon. And then our Apollo 15 launch, for example, that was not used for warfare. They probably would make close approaches to find out if we're hostile. Would we shoot at them? And we know that back in the 1950s, we did have a shoot them down order. So they would have assessed us as being hostile to their presence. Another quote from an anonymous experiencer. They tell me that they are concerned about our military's hostility. If they were shot down, I would simply have vanished from the face of the earth. No one would have found me. They probably secured plant and animal life. We hear in the 1960s, the 1970s about a spacecraft landing, about little figures getting out and taking soil samples from gardens and fields. And chances are that they would also have collected specimens of animal species from Earth. That would be what we would do. That was part of our plan during the 50s if we discovered a planet that had life. And then our plan would have been to abduct intelligent beings. And we know that At least since the 1950s, Earthlings have reported that they have been abducted. Now, Bud Hopkins, the late Bud Hopkins, told me that he had hypnotized an individual who believed they had been abducted as far back as 1939. So, how do they perceive us? They say we are a very difficult race to deal with. We are like emotional shapeshifters, anonymous. They view us as having many contradictions, from finality of weapons of mass destruction to eternal hope from people like Mother Teresa. There is ambiguity in our behavior. There is a continuum of human behavior from despair to promise. So are we malevolent? Are we benevolent? Are we both? How do they perceive us? Let's look at the war deaths during the 20th century. During the First World War, 15 million Earthlings were killed. Under Stalin's regime in the Soviet Union, 20 million lost their lives. During the Second World War, 66 million people lost their lives. In the People's Republic of China, during the reign of Mao Zedong, we lost 40 million Earthlings. In all the major wars during the 20th century on Earth, we lost 194 million, or 550,000 Earthlings. What kind of impression does that give our visitors? And yet, we have made life-sustaining advances. We have eradicated smallpox from the face of the earth. We've made advances against cancer. We have a better understanding of the mentally ill and treatment for the mentally ill. We have inoculation for the prevention of childhood diseases. Through the internet, we have the access of information, and we have a new and developing tolerance of multiculturalism. And yet, 21,000 children die each day from hunger and hunger-related causes. That is 14 children every minute. 7.6 million children die every year. We lost 76 million children between the years 2000 and 2010. That's a staggering figure. But we care for each other. And we also care for animals. But sometimes we have a failure of conscience among species that we consider inferior to ourselves. So what is the alien agenda? Denise Stoner and I were discussing that. This is Denise right here. She is MUFON's Assistant Director of Abduction Studies. And we decided to embark on a research study in order to determine commonalities among abduction experiencers. And perhaps that would give us an indication of what the alien agenda is. We devised 3 questionnaires. The first one has 45 questions. It was multiple choice and fairly easy to complete. We had 48 respondents in the study to date. The second one was the Abduction Experiencer ET Technology Questionnaire. There were only 16 questions on that, and it was more or less fill in the blanks. We didn't want to lead anyone in any particular direction. This was for people who believed that they had been abducted by aliens and had a pretty good recollection of what they observed on board the craft and what kind of procedures they were put through there. We had 21 respondents so far, not a very large sample, but not many people remember those details. That study is going to be ongoing. So if anyone in this audience is an abduction experiencer and you do have this recall, I'd certainly appreciate it if you would go online to my website and fill out that questionnaire and send it to me. Then we had a third questionnaire, and this was commonalities among non-abduction experiencers. We wanted to make sure that the commonalities that we found among abduction experiencers were not commonalities across the general population. So that was the reason for that. We advertised in the MUFON Journal, I believe online at Open Minds, also at a number of other UFO-oriented and abduction-oriented websites. We also did several radio shows. I generally do radio shows on fairly often. A lot of those shows were on paranormal radio sites. So our results were skewed a little bit among the non-abduction experiencers because there was a lot of paranormal experience taking place in their homes. So the first questionnaire that I talked about was broken down into 4 different areas: demographics, abduction memories, psychic phenomena experiences, and physiological responses. Under demographics and conscious recall, we had 17 males and 31 females that completed the first questionnaire. 43% were in the 50 to 60-year-old range. Now, I'm not sure if this is highly significant or not. It was only 21% for the non-abduction experiencers. But what we found is in the 40 to 50 age bracket, there were only 8 people. And in the 60 to 70 age bracket, there were only 5. But we had a fairly large number of experiencers who were in that 50 to 60 age range. So we're wondering if there were many, many abductions that took place in this time frame. 43% reside in the Eastern time zone. That's another thing that I'm pretty curious about because we advertised all over the United States and we had a response from as far away as Australia. 48% said that they were taken more than 10 times. 79% said that they were not alone when they were taken. 62% said that there was a secondary witness who recalled the experience. So that's pretty significant because so often we are led to believe that today's abduction experiences are sleeping, that if they do have a bed partner, the bed partner doesn't remember anything. But this was very interesting that 62% of the people who responded stated that there was someone with them, and that person recalled the experience. 89% of the experiencers had some conscious recall for their experience. It wasn't retrieved for the first time through hypnosis or through dreams. They had conscious recall of that experience. That was a surprising finding. So we asked, what did you remember? 66% had conscious recall of observing a craft at less than 1,000 feet at least one time. 59% had conscious recall of observing non-human entities immediately prior to an abduction while they were outside their home. This is very significant. They're wide awake when this happened. And we asked what were the most common ET types that they encountered. We have our little gray, the one who is about 3 to 3.5 feet tall. The taller one, who is about 4.5 to 5.5 feet tall generally. The little hybrid. The praying mantis type of being. And the reptilian. Those were the most commonly reported types. We did receive responses about a number of other types, from the blues to the see-throughs to the Nordics as well. So 75% said that they had contact with the small grays, or zetas, as we might call them. And you might be familiar with them. Small, grayish skin. Some say that it's bumpy, leathery. Some are dressed in black, tight-fitting uniforms. Others are not dressed in any kind of uniform, and some are seen wearing hoods and capes. They're generally the ones who, if they're going to abduct somebody from their home, they will be the ones that show up in your bedroom. They're the assistants to the taller zetas. They might undress you. They might dress you again, and sometimes poorly. Your clothing might be put on backwards. You might be dressed in somebody else's clothing. So this might give you an indication that something happened to support your memory of the event. They seem to be a little less intelligent than the taller zetas. They are less likely to express emotions, although I have had reports of them expressing emotions when they're surprised. For example, one man wrote that he was on the table and one was standing near him, sort of guarding him, and he kicked it, and it flew back against the wall with a very surprised look on its face. And if you remember back to my Aunt Betty Hill's experience, it was one of these short little zetas who took that tablet from her that had the alien symbols on it that she tried to take off the craft to prove that her experience was real. 82% said that they recalled having contact with the tall grays, or zetas. Their heads are a little bit smaller in proportion to their bodies than the smaller ones. They're highly intelligent, telepathic. They tend to act as personal escorts. An abduction experiencer might see the same escort throughout their lifetime. It might become familiar to them, and this will reduce their fear of what happens on the craft. They're also examiners, educators, and scientists, sometimes empathetic, and they are the communicators. Many believe that they are mostly biological beings. Then we have the praying mantis types. 54% of the respondents stated that they had had contact with the praying mantis type beings. So what you see here on the left is a sketch done by an abduction experiencer that I have been working with, and to the right is a very nice illustration by Stephen Smith, who has done a lot of work for me, does a terrific job at that. They are said to be empathetic, highly telepathic, highly intelligent. They stand generally about 5.5 to 6.5 feet tall. Some people report that their legs sort of bend sort of in M shape, almost like grasshoppers. And some abduction experiences say that they have seen them on craft with very low ceilings, but they are down in that sort of M shape with their legs making that shape so that they fit there. It's kind of, it was very perplexing to me at first when I started to hear about them being on a craft with a low ceiling when they are so tall. They might act as doctors or teachers or even tour guides on the craft. Generally, they're not wearing clothing, but some people have reported that they wear sort of navy blue jackets that might come down to their thighs. And then 46% reported contact with reptilian types. They're known as the bad boys of the neighborhood. Yet, I've received conflicting reports. Some have said that they have been very kind and empathetic. Yet others say that they're very mean to them. One person told me they raped me and my 8-year-old daughter. That's a terrible thing to happen. They're very interested in sexual contact with humans and between humans as well. And another said, it was the best sex I've ever had in my life. So are they friend or foe? Let's take a look at our visitors' behavior. Generally, people will tell me that they were in an external environment when they had their first abduction experience. For those who have a family history, this may not have happened. If your grandmother and your mother were abducted, you might be taken from your bedroom or from your home all of your life. So you may not have ever been taken from an external environment. But most people whose abduction started were taken mostly in the 60s, 70s, 80s from an external environment. They might have been driving along when what appeared to be a plane in free fall would come to them. It would stop. It might project a light into the vehicle. It might pick the vehicle up and abduct the beings inside the car. It could also happen to people who were hunting, people who were camping, fishing, that sort of thing. People were generally taken to a landed craft. They would be taken from their vehicle and walked to that landed craft, or in the early home abduction experiences, people were taken from their homes and walked onto the craft. That changed later. In these subsequent abduction experiences, more and more people began to report that they were taken from their bedrooms. There might be 3, generally the number I've received is 3, short zetas or grays appear in the bedroom. There might also be a ball of light, and that ball of light would rapidly expand into 1 to 3 gray beings. They would be then by the bed. The abduction experiencer would feel tingling, vibration, paralysis, and then of course the abject terror would set in because something is happening. They're fully awake. They might try to escape. They might cry out, but they can't move because they're paralyzed. And then all of a sudden they feel lightness. They might be lying down and then, boom, suddenly they're upright and they're going very, very rapidly toward a solid surface. Impossible? I used to think it was impossible, but I've been speaking with an astrophysicist, and he has assured me that we have the math to do that, and that we have even done it on a very small scale in a laboratory. What we would have to do, or what the ETs have to do, is let's say, hypothetically, that they vibrate at a higher frequency than we do. And all matter vibrates at a certain frequency. The wall would vibrate at a lower vibrational frequency than the human or the ET. Now, if the ET could make the wall vibrate at its frequency and make the human vibrate at its frequency, solid matter can pass through solid matter, according to the physicists that I have conferred with. And imagine how far advanced of us they are technologically. So it seems that that is probably what is happening. What about initial transport to the craft? That was a question that we asked. 86% said that they were transported through a solid surface. 68% noted a shift in their emotions from abject terror to having a feeling of familiarity and calmness when they arrived on the craft. They tend to find themselves either in a curved hallway. In part of the craft, it might be light. In the back of the craft, near the examining rooms, it might be very dimly lit. Sometimes they simply find themselves on a table and aren't aware of how they got there. Communication. We asked that question. 90% said that the ETs communicated with them telepathically. 29% said that they heard sounds such as clicking, or human voices in late-stage hybrids, also in Nordics. Most people reported undergoing medical procedures on the craft. What were their the questions regarding physiological responses? 82% said they awoke with unexplained marks on their bodies immediately after a nocturnal bedroom abduction. And some people have photographed those. They were awake when they were returned. They were able to get photographs right away. And some individuals have sent those to me. I've started a catalog of marks on people's bodies. Only 21% of the non-abduction experiences said that they have awoken with unexplained marks on their bodies, and they are different than the ones that the abduction experiences have awoken with. The non-abduction experiencers report bruises and scratches, as do some abduction experiences. Abduction experiencers also report triangular burn marks on their neck, or their upper back, or elsewhere. They have patterned puncture wounds on their bodies, scoop marks, and 52% said that they had nosebleeds immediately after they were returned from an abduction experience at least one time, probably from the insertion of an implant. 26% said that they suffered burns, hair loss, or conjunctivitis during or immediately after an abduction experience. It was 0% for non-abduction experiencers. 44% said that they suffer from migraine headaches. It was less than 1% for non-abduction experiences. 74% say that they now have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, generally due to fear. 50% said they are more sensitive to light than they were prior to their abduction experience. This is a photograph of what might be an implant inside of an abduction experience's hand. Tissue samples, scoop marks, here. You can see the scoop mark. And then we have pattern puncture wounds reported over and over again down here in a triangle shape, and it looks like that advanced it forward. There is also a mind scan, and this is a quote from another anonymous abduction experiencer. He put his eyes close to mine, and I felt intense love coming from him. I have never experienced such a powerful feeling directed at me before. He told me that I am part of them, that I am family. I have no reason to be fearful or to distrust them. They mean no harm. And yet, another abduction experiencer wrote, there have been a few times where I felt a short period of pleasure. This is a feeling that comes from them. They want me to feel this way for their own benefit. They communicate to me that I'm performing an important function for them. It is helping me to understand more about them, to understand more about us. And they need to take my genetic material. They do not intend to harm me. Nearly every female abduction experiencer has reported that they underwent a reproductive procedure where a needle is inserted into their navel for the purpose of withdrawing ova. Men report that a cup-like device is placed over their groin and that sperm is removed. This is a photograph of an abduction experiencer's navel. She took the photograph immediately after she was returned home. Her navel was bleeding. These are her calves. You can see pressure marks. On this one, the three, see if I can do this without advancing the slide. You can see the 3 finger marks and also a scratch at the bottom below that. This is the other calf. Many abduction experiences report fluorescence on their skin, and many investigators have found this as well. Well, fluorescence can be caused by chemicals. It can be caused by detergents. But some abduction experiencers end up with a fluorescent green pattern on their skin. I'm working with one experiencer right now who recently reported to me that there were 2 rectangles, perfect rectangles, on her hand, and underneath that was a curved-edged triangle. A biopsy was taken of that, and the tissue was studied. It penetrated 8 layers of derma. So what do we find going on the craft? Sexual and non-sexual DNA extraction. Those punch biopsies that leave scoop marks may be DNA extraction that is non-sexual. There are hybrid baby presentations. Sexual contact with humans, reptilians, hybrids, while being observed on board the craft. Removal of body fluids, including blood and glandular material. Now, some men are beginning to report to me that they recall a needle being inserted probably into their thymus. The thymus controls the immune system. Without an adequate thymus function, you will develop lupus and other immune disorders. Very interesting. I'm looking more into this. I don't have enough information to draw any conclusion on that. People report immersion in viscous fluid that they find they can breathe. Again, we're not sure what this is for, but it's reported over and over again among abduction experiencers. I used to think that it might be used to protect the human body during transport into space. I'm beginning to change my mind on that and beginning to wonder if it might be for medicinal purposes or in order to sanitize a human being before they leave the craft. I really don't know. I only know that a large number of abduction experiences report that they are being put into this viscous fluid in rectangular tanks. They can breathe it. Those who are conscious before this occurs are extremely frightened about this. They think that they're going to die, that they're going to drown, and are very surprised to find that they're able to breathe it. When they're taken out of the tanks, it dries very, very rapidly. They also see images of cataclysmic events on screens or on holographic images or images that are just somehow projected into their brains. One of the questions that we asked is, do you have a formal diagnosis of chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome or reactivating mononucleosis? There have been studies in the past that showed that abduction experiences have a higher percentage of these diseases than in the general population. And what is chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome? It is not just being tired. It's debilitating fatigue that is not improved with bed rest, and it may be exacerbated by physical or mental activity. It is not just being tired. It is not depression. You usually have a low-grade fever and flu-like symptoms. There are tender lymph nodes, sore throat, and headache. It sort of acts like a retrovirus, but no virus has been discovered yet. There are also problems with concentration and memory. Some people even lose the ability to walk. Some people have to go on Social Security disability. 41% of the abduction experiencers who completed our questionnaires have a formal diagnosis, whereas it is less than 1% in the general population. It costs the U.S. $9.1 billion a year. Getting back to the extraction of reproductive material, here is another quote. Chambers are used to create a human form from genetic material. Anonymous. And what you're looking at is a sketch by an abduction experiencer who was taken in 1978. She was taken into a room where she observed fetuses in various stages of development. Some of them had a human appearance, others had an appearance much more like the Greys that took her. She was taken into an adjacent room and placed on a table. Many, many people report that these fetuses or these embryos are implanted in their bodies in an artificial sac, and that about 3 months or so later they're taken back on board the craft and the sac is removed. And the fetus grows to its full development inside one of these chambers. After they're removed from the chambers, the ETs want them to have skin-to-skin contact with the humans. They want the humans to nurture these babies. And we know that if human babies are not nurtured, they will develop problems. They will develop disorders where they will never be able to function in society normally. 23% of the respondents said that they had contact with hybrids or have observed hybrids on the craft, and often this nurturing kind of experience takes place. There are generally 3 stages or more of hybrids. There are the ones that look more like the grays, and they live out their lifetimes on the craft. They're telepathic. There are the mid-stage that is sort of halfway between being gray and being human. And then there are the ones who appear to be of human form. Perhaps they have been genetically altered by the grays, but they appear more human. And many abduction experiences have reported that they believe they have been made pregnant, or these embryos have been implanted into their wombs, that they have carried them to full term and have babies here on Earth that they suspect a hybrid. We have no evidence that they are genetically different than humans. I do have some information that the grays are probably not genetically compatible with humans. So there must be some kind of splicing that's taking place if all of this is actually occurring, and certainly abduction experiencers, and a large percentage of them, are reporting this. The late-stage hybrids, as I said, do speak using voices and can survive on Earth, according to reports. Another quote, "Existence in space has caused them to lose their ability to reproduce. They have to use human DNA in order to propagate their species." So that is what one anonymous abduction experiencer told me. Another said, "In the past, they took many samples, but this process has now stopped. It was based around a reintegration of certain DNA nucleotides so that some ETs could experience different stages or different ranges of emotions, ones that their race no longer understood. What better way to understand a race than to become like them?" 2 different takes. Some abduction experiences have reported that they were given tours of the craft. And this is a sketch by one. And she told me that she was taken into a room in the central core of the craft, and it appeared to be comprised of biological material. And that there were almost like lotus flowers that would close up around this biological material in the central core. It is interesting that so many abduction experiencers wrote about this independently. One wrote, "The mothership and scout ships were both mechanical and biological. The physicality of the equipment was there, but you also had to use your mental abilities to move things. The craft is operated mainly biologically. Its interior section is alive. It can think. These are different abduction experiencers. The craft seems to have its own intelligence. It can sense its surroundings. Biological material is used deep within the energy system of the craft. These craft are living entities, much like bacteria. They live, breathe, function, and create. They are grown from what was initially a hybrid framework. The craft are genetically modified structures. Not all craft have individual operators, but there are certain parts of their DNA replicated." And then last, 32% stated that they observed human types on board the craft. They reported Nordic types, and they were told or shown scenes of cataclysmic Earth destruction stemming from a magnetic pole shift. Or experiencers have feelings or visions of impending disaster, earthquakes, or widespread flooding. The Nordic types, they tell me, are very concerned about this kind of experience happening, but they have a policy of non-interference. We also hear many reports of MyLab abductions, military groups working in concert with ETs. There's been some speculation that perhaps they are hybrids dressed in military uniforms. Or perhaps they are human military groups working surreptitiously with the alien beings. We asked, have you witnessed paranormal activity in your home? This has always been a thorn in the side of ufology because paranormal activity and nuts and bolts ufology are so far apart. And we've never really wanted to come together. Alan Hynek found this, Jacques Vallée found this, many researchers and investigators have found paranormal activity being reported by abduction experiencers. And it's something that I almost went to kicking and screaming. But we did ask that question with some very interesting results. 85% of the respondents reported paranormal phenomena in their homes, whereas 42% of the non-abduction experiences reported that. And remember, we advertised on paranormal radio shows, so I think that that's why the result of that was skewed. I don't think that's true of the general population. What did abduction experiencers see? Light orbs in their homes, over and over again. Doors opening and closing. Things flying through the air toward them. 43% said that it happened before their first abduction, after their first abduction. 26% said before their first abduction. 89% said that they received telepathic messages that were related to an abduction experience, whereas 33% of the non-abduction experiences reported telepathic communication, not with ETs. 47% said that they had at least temporarily received a gift of healing after their first abduction experience. And 84% said that they at least temporarily developed new psychic abilities. Things go missing and then are returned to a conspicuous location. What you have here is a photograph of my Aunt Betty Hill's earrings. Those are the earrings that she was wearing on the night of her abduction experience. She wasn't aware that they were missing until a couple of months later. She and my uncle were in the White Mountains, retracing the route they took that night, trying to jog their memories more about what happened during that 2-hour period of missing time. When they returned home that night, they found a pile of leaves on their dining room table. And in those leaves were the earrings that Betty was wearing on the night of her experience. This has happened time and time again among abduction experiencers. Jewelry is missing and then returned, cameras, or different household items, and returned to a very conspicuous location in an odd way. 68% said they experienced malfunctions in electrical equipment, such as lights blowing out or blinking out when they walked or drove under them, digital watches malfunctioning, and computers going haywire following an abduction experience. 33% of the non-abduction experiencers also reported this. Okay. So are they friend or foe? Hunter Gray, formerly John Salter, retired full professor at the University of North Dakota and an abduction experiencer, stated, "I think the ETs are definitely the children of the Creator, and I strongly think, as I've said, that they are friendly, but given the turbulence of humanity, are understandably cautious." An anonymous abduction experiencer stated, "If our ET visitors had wanted to harm us, they could have done so long ago." Another stated, "They are not the kind of people you want to associate with. Their ambitions and methods are demeaning and sometimes cruel." Dr. Carla Turner, the late Carla Turner, who was an abduction researcher and psychotherapist who used hypnosis, wrote, "Before we allow ourselves to believe in the benevolence of the alien interpretation, we should ask, do enlightened beings need to use the cover of night to perform good deeds? Do they need to paralyze us and render us helpless to resist? Do angels need to steal our fetuses? Do they need to manipulate our children's genitals and probe our rectums? Are fear, pain, and deception consistent with high spiritual motives?" Another wrote, "Humans have a capacity to allow their filtering systems to present images in a distorted fashion. Their fears determine what they see in every situation." And I wrote, "Perhaps our past experiences have left an emotional imprint upon each of us that determines our individual perception of our extraterrestrial visitors. It is our emotional history that determines our perception of them." Another wrote, not all non-human entities have proven to be friendly, as is the same on Earth with our own species. So, are they friend or foe? And why don't they make contact? Possible reasons. Perhaps they consider us too inferior a species for overt contact. Just as we consider different species on this earth who are different from humans to be inferior to us, let's say that they're 500,000 years ahead of us technologically. Let's say they are of an entirely different species, insectoid, reptilian, or of something very different that we don't even have here on Earth, such as the Greys or the Zetas. They might consider us to be inferior. Perhaps they're harvesting our resources and don't want to be held accountable for their behavior toward us. Perhaps they are so different than humans that overt interaction would be impossible. Perhaps they have a policy of non-interference. Perhaps they know that we're bellicose and that they don't want to engage in warfare against us because they're so far technologically superior to us that we might destroy ourselves, or they might have to destroy us. Perhaps our emotional selves are far too difficult for them to deal with. Perhaps they're lying in wait for the time when they will take over planet Earth. That's a scary thought, and I hope that's not true. Perhaps they're already living here in a genetically modified human form, and perhaps more and more will be in the future. Or perhaps the Earth is a giant classroom. This is my favorite explanation, because skeptics say, why have ETs been performing the same experiments on human beings for the past 50 plus years? Why is the same thing happening over and over again? And what I have been able to deduce from all of this is that perhaps we are a classroom. Perhaps students and professors and scientists come to Earth, maybe we're a university college course, and they come here over and over again to perform experiments on us, and as new generations of students come, they receive training on Earth's geological structures, atmosphere, oceans, flora, and fauna. And I want to thank you for listening, and we'll see if there's any time to take questions. Well, I guess we're going to take a break. Thank you so much.